schematic design money for the middle school and high school. That has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed now. Because otherwise, the high school is going to be exploding. The enrollment at the high school is currently 549 students. It's going to go up to over 750 students in 5 or 6 years. We need that additional space at the high school as well, and that's another important project. So again, I hope this helps address some of the enrollment questions and issues.
Terry, I do have, just to bring back to the class size, I think, to spell this class size of 17, I think this came from the public hearing and a woman actually stating that her child's first grade class, I believe it was either the Little or the Hood, had 19 children. So people may ask, why not redistrict? Why can't we, spread these kids out? Do we really need this space? Is it just that class that's 19? People here 19, my child has 23, but
Redistricting is something we're probably going to do, but I don't think it's going to solve all the problems. It's certainly not going to bring the class size down to anything close to 17 and 19. As you can see, some of these classes are going to have 24 and 25.
So that's probably an isolated class.
Let me tell you exactly what happened with that 17 at the public hearing. I think, in fact, there was might have even been a kindergarten class, and somebody did raise their hand and say something about a first grade class. That was essentially one class that had 17 kids. People who wanted to make their point seized upon that one number, and they ran with it. The next thing you know, it's in the paper that the average class size is 17. That's one class, okay? As you can see, every class next year is going to be up over 20, some significantly over 20, in the range of 24 and 25. Some of the schools are going to be higher than others. I think the little school in the third grade next year is going to be about 25 students per class, whereas the third grade at the batch may be less than that, 21 or 22. Redistricting is something that the superintendent's looking at, and I think realistically we're going to have to do that because, quite frankly, the batch health is overcrowded. The classrooms are too small, and on top of that, we have too many kids in there. And it may be that some of those kids are going to have to be moved out to one of the other 2 elementary schools. But I can't stress enough that we need the additional space now. We're going to need it 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, 8 years from now, and we need the replacement. This is as much about replacing the Batchelder School facility as it is adding on new space.
So it definitely looks like the Little and the Hood school population is going to be affected by this no matter what happens.
By what?
By redistricting?
Well, we're not talking massive redistricting. We're talking about, I think, some spot redistricting to move some kids to alleviate some class disparities, size. But no, it's not going to be a huge thing. I don't think people have to worry about that. In fact, I think we're asking for volunteers first.
We're hoping for volunteers. What we could use ideally is about half a dozen kids from the batch going to the Little and another half dozen going to the Hood. Redistricting is not as simple a solution as it sometimes sounds. If you look at the batch right now, look at the Little right now, and from that district, there are 60 first graders, there are 77 fourth graders. Well, if you move new families into the district, do they have only first graders, which is what you want to add? If they have fourth graders too, you've created a different inequity. And you don't redistrict a house here and a house there. You redistrict neighborhoods. So it's a difficult thing to balance. The little school basically has about 30% of the school population right now. So that's a fair barometer of the problems that you have with redistricting. In the long run, the goal of the school committee is to have one school with 30%, a second school with 30%, and a third school with 40% of the population. The plans are predicated on 10 classrooms at each grade level. And the long-term population projections suggest about 220 kids at each grade level. So that's an average of 22 kids per classroom. Those are the long-term goals. We're not looking at building for a peak and then having it drop off dramatically. The peak is going to be higher than that, and there's going to be a period when we have larger classrooms. It's inevitable. Although at the moment, some of the grades are so big. Next year's first grade is going to be 243 kids. That's got to be more than 10 classrooms. You can't put 24 plus kids into a first grade and expect to provide a quality education. So we're really hoping that, at the moment, that a few people will volunteer to move out of the batch, because otherwise, the number of kids in the batch is 25 and a half kids per classroom in the first grade.
First grade. In fact, if you look at the overhead, that's the exact number of students per school, per grade projected for next year. And if you look at, as Steve said, the first grade at the batch, it's just, it's too big. It's 25.5, I believe, is projected. If you look at the little school, the third grade at the little school is 25 students, and the fourth grade is 25.7. And those are the exact numbers based on current enrollments projected for next year.
Okay. Thank you.
And one more point.
Come on, Jerry.
The last point I want to make is you see that we're listing 27 total classrooms for the Batchelder School.
Yes.
The new school's got 29. We're not adding a lot more space. I mean, we're replacing the space that we have, and it's just what we need. We're not adding a lot of additional space that's going to be not used or empty. Okay?
Right, because the 27 includes modulars. that are
Includes the
sitting out there.
modulars, 4
We're
classrooms,
getting
yeah.
rid of it. All right. We're gonna steer away from the most important thing in town to some people, which is the kids, and to something else that is pretty important to a lot of us, which is our pocketbooks. And so, Mark, I'm going to ask you as a representative from FinCom. Many people say we're in a budget crunch, so let's save the money, not find a cheaper or some other solution for the space needs. Save the money that we're going to spend, whether it's 12 million or 20 million, and instead put that towards teachers, school budget, roads. If we don't build these schools, if people vote no on both these questions and no school option is found and we don't build these schools, are we going to see more money going towards teachers or town budgets?
No, we'll see additional, if one or the two schools goes through, we'll see additional costs that the town will have to bear as far as paying down the debt that will incur, but in the event that nothing happens, absolutely not. We cannot take any of our operating funds and supplement that with this fictitious amount of money that's going to be bonded. There's no impact whatsoever.
All right, so money, if it doesn't go to the schools, it doesn't go to the teachers. There's no change.
This is outside of the normal operating funds. This is an override. If it passes, it's an additional tax that will be levied. It has nothing to do with the operating costs of the town.
Well, speaking of taxes, Mr. Jones, you're here to talk about this, at least the circuit breaker issue. Yes, something. Are looking for more information.
One of the things that was passed a couple of years ago, I think it was in the FY '99 state budget, was something called the circuit breaker, which is senior citizen property tax relief. And I'll just read from this because I want to make sure I get it right. You have to own your property, be 65 years or older, principal residence of the owner. The assessed value of the property can't exceed $400,000. If you're a single filer, you can't make more than $40,000. And if you're a married couple filing or head of household, the limit goes to 50 for head of household, and joint filers is $60,000 in income. And then you're eligible for a tax deduction of anything that exceeds 10% of your income. So if you have, and I'll read you this example we came up with, if Mary Johnson is a 68-year-old widow who owns her home at 123 XYZ Street, and she has an assessed property value of $200,000, she currently pays property taxes of $3,228 per year. Her water bill is $200 a year, which I'm sure most of us would love. She gets a pension from her deceased husband's job and Social Security for a total annual income of $28,000. If you take her property tax bill and half her water bill, it gives you a total of $3,328, and that exceeds 10% of her annual income by $528. So next April, 2002, for tax year 2001, she would qualify for a credit of $375 from the state, even if potentially she didn't have any tax status with the state. A year later, that limit would go to $750, so Mary would get a credit of $528. She'd basically completely wipe out anything she paid, and as her taxes went up, it would go up to $750. Now, all these figures are indexed, so over time, they retain their value. Some of the problem with some of the other exemptions that we have in law is that they don't change over time, so people start to fall out of qualifying for them because the thresholds are set so low that, it may be something if you were, you made $6,000, you qualify. Well, now $6,000, everybody maybe passes that, but it doesn't bear really any relationship to what it costs to own a house in North Reading of any kind of category. This is a good thing, and I think in terms of the context of Swan Pond, or the debate in town is it's something senior citizens need to keep in mind about the impact. And I'll use it as a segue into talking about SBA, which is, to me, having been on the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, the optimum time to do Swan Pond was probably a couple of years ago. The list is getting very, very long. We're now into a situation where there's a little question. We're kind of transitioning into a new SBA program, and there's a higher percentage for the renovation, I think like Jonathan touched on, and there's a slightly lower percentage for new, but there's such a disparity in cost that from a financial perspective, it still comes out to be a tremendous advantage to go with the Swan Pond, strictly on financial things. I know there are a number of other considerations, quite frankly, all of which I think come down on Swan Pond, in my opinion, but be that as it may. So I think as time goes on, the optimum may have been a couple of years ago. The longer we wait to make a decision, we come further away from optimum time. So I think this is the next most optimum time, is this May, to make a decision. And I think based on all the factors on the table, I think the Swan Pond is the way to go.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask one question about that?
Well, I was going to,
Oh, okay, good.
I'll follow up on the circuit breaker.
Yep.
You may not know this, but do you have any idea, first off, on how many residents might actually be able to take advantage or be impacted by that?
I don't. We're actually in the process of working somebody with Mystic Valley Elder Services to kind of do a survey of, the number of people that may qualify, with age category, income category, and the assessed value of their property. But I'm going to assume that some of the people that would be most concerned about any kind of an override or any kind of a change in their property tax situation or makeup in town, this is going to be a tremendous benefit to them, and probably more than offset the impact of any increase, and probably provide some relief beyond that.
And just to clarify, of course, this isn't tied directly to any school building issue, because it's any tax impact that they have.
Yeah,
So
any
that
tax
would-
impact,
police station.
whatever your property taxes are, whether it's from a debt exclusion, an operating override, a capital override, or just property taxes in general without any overrides.
Brad, do they need to hire an accountant to figure it out?
No, actually, we have some people with Mystic Valley Elder Services, and that would be more than helpful. And I have material, and I'm more than happy to mail it out, and I don't want to look for work, but I'm more than happy anybody wants to call my office. We will get it out to you within a matter of days.
Tracy, you have a follow?
My question was on the SBAB. Swan Pond's already there on the table. If a plan to renovate the batch does come up, can we flip-flop those plans, or where does the renovation of the batch come into play?
Well, I think then it's going to be up to, I think as Howard touched on and the school committee touched on, is if both were approved in May, both passed, I think the bachelor school would have to go back to town meeting for appropriation and a vote, and then I think the historic district would have to weigh in as kind of one of the co-final say people, and the school committee would have to make a final decision, and then it would have to be submitted. And I think one of the issues that came up is we'd have to show some justifications to kind of why we flip plans if it was the batch over the Swan Pond. What's changed in the community beyond the community just voting for one over the other, given the ones we've advanced in previous years. But there's 150, I think it's 153 projects on the list right now, and that's just on the Category 2. Category 3 list, which is where Swan Pond or a bachelor school would fall. And it's going to take a cumulative authorization of $129 million, and that's only for the first year payment, so multiply that by 20. And you can see what we're going to be spending on school construction this year. The state budget is approaching $350 to $400 million. So it's imperative to do something sooner than later. Realizing, again, I know to beat a dead horse, that I think that the sooner has already gone by, but we need to stay as close to that as we can.
Just one quick one. Does the SBAB at this point have any stance on if there had been any changes? I know we had a meeting with them regarding the renovation project. What is their stance at this point? Would it be from scratch, or?
We'd kind of go back to a certain level of scratch. We talked about, the bachelor school, we talked about the Swan Pond school, and it was pretty clear from them, if there's a specific plan, one of the things we're going to want to see is how does it address the issues why we say we would reimburse the bachelor in the first place, and why this change in the community. But I come back to, and I guess what my finance committee had, from a financial perspective, I think these numbers have shown clearly that a Swan Pond school, from a financial perspective, is the way to go. And I think Jerry and Steve touched on the quantitative in terms of space and the qualitative in terms of space are both issues that I think are better addressed with a swan pond.